At the time of writing this, it happened 2 weeks ago. I've always hated almost all of my neighbors. I just graduated from college and live alone, but it comes with a price. I live in a very rough area, the only place where I could afford a house, so I couldn't possibly have ideal neighbors. The neighbor on one side always blasts loud music, while the neighbor on the other side is the scariest people I've ever encountered in my life. There are 2 people living next door. One, a woman in her 60s who is unfriendly and honestly seems not normal, and a slightly younger woman who has some severe mental disorder. I don't know what the relationship between the 2 is. Often I would sit on the front porch when I look over and see the old woman restraining the younger woman as she goes through some kind of panic attack. She would fold her hands and quickly rock back and forth while screaming and making noises. Sometimes she would even turn and point in my direction and whisper to the other woman. It was quite disturbing. Actually, sometimes I would even go inside the house when I felt too uncomfortable. However, one night as usual, I had to sleep early for work in the morning. However, the neighbor next door was making unusual noise. I could hear the crazy woman screaming and angry as the old woman screamed in pain. It went on for about an hour, and I couldn't take it anymore. I angrily walked towards the house next door and knocked on the door. The old woman opened the door and greeted me with, "What do you want?" I asked as politely as possible to calm the noise. In response, she raised her eyebrows and lowered her head, clearly annoyed by my request. That's when the younger woman entered the living room screaming, "How dare you!" repeatedly. The old woman restrained her from approaching me, then slammed the door roughly in front of my face. I didn't know what just happened, but I felt like I didn't get what I wanted. I went back to my bed feeling defeated. However, I realized they eventually became silent next to me. I could finally sleep peacefully. Well, I woke up feeling like the night passed too quickly. I looked at the clock and saw that it was only 3 a.m. My head fell back to the pillow with relief, but shortly after I felt like I could hear something coming from below. I got out of bed and went to my door just to make sure I wasn't mistaken. When I didn't hear any other sounds, I went back to bed. I woke up again to the dark room only 20 minutes after I fell asleep again. I didn't know what could have woken me up, but then I heard. I panicked and tried to find my phone on the table next to the bed as a source of light, but when I found it, I didn't dare to turn on the light. I looked around the dark room in silence, trying to find a black figure in the room. I looked in every corner of the room, and although it was so dark, I could feel no one standing there. This time I heard where the sound was coming from. I turned towards the edge of the bed and saw a black object, like a shadow, circle right at the edge of the wooden wall of my bed. When the light from my phone revealed that the black object was the face of the crazy woman from next door. She screamed like a mad person she loved. She screamed as if she were a vampire under the light. I screamed too. I screamed as I awkwardly ran toward the door and stumbled halfway while looking back, seeing her following me. I closed my bedroom door behind me and ran downstairs to the ground floor, where I locked the door leading to the upstairs. I called the police as the woman banged on the door screaming nonsense. When the police arrived, I told them that the woman lived next door and that she was mentally insane. The old woman from next door came after hearing all the commotion and spoke to the police, pleading with them to let her go. But they insisted on taking her away at least for the night. One of the officers asked me if I wanted to press charges, and as he asked this, the old woman gave me the most evil, hateful look imaginable. I chose not to press charges, but her stare didn't change. The officers took the old woman away while the old woman continued to stare at me as she walked back to her house. 5 minutes later, I saw her get into her car and leave. Both neighbors still lived next to me. I'm seriously considering moving because the disgusting woman next door made it clear that she hates me deeply, and I concluded that the mentally ill woman is not only scary, but also dangerous. I've lived in 3 houses in my life, 2 of them with my family, and the current one I live in alone. We lived in the first house for the first 15 years of my life, and the second house for the next 7 years before I moved to the current one. This experience happened in my first house when I was 15 years old. During the last few months, my family lived in that house. I don't remember my family ever being really friendly with the neighbors. In fact, there were 2 kids living next door with their father, whom my brother and I only spoke to maybe once or twice in our lives. Strangely, we knew both their names, Eric and Todd. One day, my younger brother, who is 5 years younger than me, and I were outside playing basketball in our driveway. That's when one of the 2 kids next door came out and walked towards us to start a conversation. I don't remember exactly what we said to each other, but I remember the first question he asked us was if it was true that we were moving. As the older sibling, I was the one who spoke the most. Todd might be around my age. I never really asked. At the end of the conversation, he invited me to join him and his brother to go shooting with BB guns at the river in the woods down the street. The next day, I agreed since it was the weekend, and I didn't have any plans. My brother asked if he could come at the last moment, not based on the assumption that he was automatically invited too. Todd said yes, then left. The next day, about an hour before sunset, Eric and Todd knocked on the door. We quickly opened the door because our parents didn't know that we were going shooting with BB guns. Walking on the sidewalk with Todd and Eric wearing forest uniforms and carrying BB gun bags was truly odd. The level of seriousness apparent in both of them was really strange to my brother and me, and we kept exchanging glances, holding back laughter a few times because of it. We reached the woods after not much talking. I could already tell that the 2 kids were only a few words. Maybe that's why we never formally met them until then. Todd placed the gun bag on the ground and opened it while Eric aggressively broke branches off trees and threw them into the river. My brother and I kept looking at each other again, this time not feeling funny. Todd pulled out some guns and handed them to my brother and me, and that's when Todd detonated the bomb and told us the guns were real. Eric took out the loaded gun from the bag and started shooting towards the trees across the river. When I realized that he wasn't joking about the real guns, I felt a mix of anger and confusion. I grabbed the gun from my brother's hand and put it back into the bag. I told them that we were uncomfortable with this and had to leave. Eric stopped shooting, and they both stared at us with expressions that seemed half angry. One of the 2 kids shouted curse words at us as we walked away. I always felt that the 2 kids were troublemakers, but this confirmed it. I told my brother not to talk to them again for the rest of our time there. We told our parents at the dinner table that night that they were really naughty kids, but we didn't mention the guns. I woke up that night because the cold wind was hitting my face. My window was wide open. I felt something hard push against the back of my head as I was looking out the window, and there was someone behind me saying, "Shh." Somehow I didn't scream or jump. I remained calm. I could understand what was happening pretty quickly. I heard Todd's whisper behind my head. He told me that if I told anyone, especially his father, about the guns or the visit, he would come back and kill me and my entire family. I responded with a trembling, "Okay." He pushed my head with his gun before leaving through my window. Every night after that for months, I would see Todd or Eric at a certain window in their house looking into my or my brother's room. Their behavior became increasingly strange towards the end of our moving date. Just a week before we moved, a stone was thrown at my window one night around 1 a.m. I opened the window and saw Todd aiming the gun up the window and felt like I was going to die. I fell to the ground only to hear both kids laughing hysterically. I heard one of them call me a B word. There were 2 other incidents that week where the 2 kids would harass me or my brother, and in the end, I couldn't think of a more perfect time for us to move and get out of there. After years, neither my brother nor I told anyone about the 2 kids or their threats. What I know is that the 2 kids were troubled, and it was a good thing we got out of there when we did. I am currently in a difficult situation, and honestly, I don't know what to do. I'll start from the beginning. 5 years ago, my next-door neighbor, Charlie, or Charles as we call him, informed us about the disappearance of his 14-year-old son. He reported it to the police. It became news, spread everywhere. My wife and I felt very sorry and always offered to help them in any way we could. As time passed without any news of their son, we assumed that they eventually accepted and realized that the worst might have happened. My wife and I never had the courage to ask if his body was finally found. Sometimes, Charles and his wife would invite me and my wife for barbecues during the warm months. We noticed that both of them were never the same since their son went missing. Kathy, Charles's wife, was always quieter and more reserved, while Charles seemed more awkward and nervous. Both could be understandable to a certain extent. Fast forward a few years, just last week, Charles came to me while I was taking out the trash and asked to borrow a shovel. Without hesitation, I ran to get my best shovel without asking why he needed it. He thanked me and said he just needed to do some work in his backyard and would return it the next day. Then he disappeared into his yard. I went back inside, and when I was at one of the upstairs windows with a direct view of Charles's backyard, I could see that he was digging a large hole in the ground. He seemed to struggle a little. He's 56 years old. I thought of going to get my second shovel to help him. As I entered his yard and called out his name, he turned from what he was doing, dropped my shovel, and immediately walked towards me, saying, "No, it's okay, I can do it, please just leave." I said, "What's wrong with you? This is not a big deal." Especially because of his strange reaction. He said that I wasn't allowed to use that shovel on his property, and then pointed to the gate as if I were a dog. I was so stunned by his behavior that I just left without saying anything else. I went back upstairs to spy on him through the window. He continued digging the hole for at least another half an hour, and when it finally looked like he was done, he started looking around, gazing up towards the neighboring houses, as if checking and making sure no one was watching. Then, before I could think to hide, he caught sight of me at my window. All I could do then was casually walk away. He seemed to be planning something, and I wanted to know what it was. I continued to keep an eye on his yard occasionally, but he didn't dig anymore. I thought he knew that I was watching him now, and would wait until nighttime when it's dark to find out what was at the bottom of the hole he dug. At 1:30 in the morning, I heard the sound of a shovel hitting the ground outside. It was too dark to see anything from the window now, so I quietly went out and looked over the fence at the back. I could see him digging hard and clearly. When he went back inside his house, I took the opportunity to sneak into his backyard and see what was in the hole he dug. The moonlight alone was enough to reveal a small part of the black plastic bag protruding from the ground at the bottom of the hole. I saw his back door and went back to the hole. I did this 3 times, deciding whether to see what was in the bag. Eventually, I decided to run back to my yard. and it was a good decision because he came back outside within seconds. But he didn't dig anymore. In fact, he disappeared to the other side of his house and didn't come back again. I went back inside the house and went back to bed without waking up my wife. The next day, the first thing I did was to look out the window to see that the hole in Charles's backyard was completely covered. I also noticed that his SUV was parked on the street now, not in his driveway. I don't know what happened all night, but I'm disturbed by the thought that whatever was at the bottom of the hole might be his son's body. For me, he dug that hole to unearth whatever he had previously buried there and take it somewhere else to dispose of it. This is all speculative. Call me crazy if you want. I didn't tell anyone, not even my wife. And honestly, I don't know what to do. Charles didn't return my shovel. I wouldn't even ask for it back. In fact, he has avoided me since then. And something disturbing happened yesterday. By chance, I looked out the window across Charlie's house and caught him standing at one of his windows, looking at my window. When he saw me, he closed the curtains, and it was daytime. I don't know what to do, but honestly, I'm scared.